Hello, everyone. I wanted to talk about this article that was sent to me by a user that I'm going to keep anonymous unless he wants to reveal himself in the comments section. But a user sent this article to me, and the title of this article is House Husband Backlash as High-Flying Wives Ditch Men They Wanted to Stay at Home. And I want to talk about this article because I think it highlights perfectly the hypocrisy and the mentality that we find in the whole homemaking and how it's propped up as this magical, indispensable service that's so important. But if you pay attention, that as soon as men turn in their traditional male provider protector role and decide, okay, I'm going to dispense this valuable service, women don't like that too much. Now, I'm going to read you various quotes from the article, and all of these come from men that are relegating their experiences after becoming house husbands and how their wives react to them. And one of these gentlemen said, quote, and this is all in the description box, the link to the article, just in case you want to read it for yourself. He says, quote, I sensed that Luis was becoming more detached. Luis is his wife. I sensed that Luis was becoming more detached and less interested in me sexually within a year of becoming house husband, says Richard, age 50. She was always picking on me for silly little things she said I hadn't done, like the washing up or not tidying away the toys. It was as if she was losing all respect for me just because I was the one at home doing the domestic work duties. Then, one day, 2 years ago, she announced she was leaving me and taking the children with her. She told me she was going to go live with her mother, 20 miles away, and to say that I was devastated does not do my feelings justice. It was as if the bottom had fallen out of my world, end quote. Now, to this gentleman, I would say, well, did you expect anything different? It's quite clear that as much as women prop up the importance of, quote, homemaking, it loses all importance when the man in the relationship takes up the task. And this is because homemaking is easy, stress-free labor that can hardly be called work. And women want to be able to pass off what most men would consider to be a ridiculously easy job as some difficult endeavor that's on par with an engineer or a doctor or a welder or a plumber or an electrician, etc. These men, whom society could not exist without, put in 50 or 60 or 70-hour work weeks habitually, and get home exhausted day in and day out. And their wife, who couldn't possibly understand her husband's mentally and physically taxing day of, I don't know, Laplace transforms or TIG and arc welding or even cardiac surgery, his wife may have had to feel the overwhelming complexities of a diaper change or a trip to the grocery store or the dehumanization of keeping a tidy house. Now, ironically, in the eyes of the law, these two, if married, are supposedly contributing an equal amount to the marriage, and this, of course, is the rationalization that justifies giving women vast sums of her husband's wealth after the divorce, when she clearly contributed nothing more than menial house duties. And so in this article, as Richard described, it begins. We're talking about the detachment phase, one of the first readily observable phases of the divorce process. It's really easy to spot when the woman initiates this self-destruct sequence. The manner in which she displays her need to just get away and get away as fast as possible is the stuff of legend, equal only to the husband's claims of cluelessness, which are just as textbook in these situations. And part of you would think that men would learn, but every time it's, oh, my world is ending. Oh, I can't believe she's doing this. As if they haven't heard of women doing this in droves. I mean, do these men exist in a cultural vacuum somewhere that they don't hear about men being utterly and completely ruined in divorce? Are they just not paying attention? Perhaps what they assume, and this is just my opinion, is that because these men are stay-at-home dads, which makes them immune to the financial ravages of divorce, that they've escaped the destructive consequences of it altogether. As we'll see, this is hardly the case. The article continues by saying, quote, for 5 years, Richard from Watford had worked hard to become the perfect, quote, mother to their sons. Notice how this is referred to as becoming the perfect mother to their sons. This is the presumption of motherhood, of course, which we've talked about thoroughly in previous videos, but I just want to point it out where it shows up. But yes, it says, Richard from Watford had worked hard to become the perfect mother to their sons, Jack, who is now 9, and Edward, who is 7. But from the moment he gave up his job, Richard says Luis, aged 47, failed to see him as a man. The phenomenon of the house husband is an increasingly popular one, the article says, and the number of men deciding to become house husbands has increased by a staggering 83% since 1993. It says, according to recent figures from the Office for National Statistics, there are more than 200,000 fathers in the UK choosing to give up their careers and raise their children at home. And then the article says, but are the couples who go down this domestic route sowing the seeds of marital disharmony? It seems that in many cases, the rise of modern career women has had an unexpected and disastrous knock-on effect on many husbands who assume the traditionally female role. In short, having a man whose primary function is not as alpha male breadwinner but domestic drudge just ain't sexy. End quote. That's right, men. You see, your role is to be a breadwinner. That's what you exist for to society and women. You have no hopes, you have no dreams, you have no desires, you have no vulnerabilities. You aren't a human being to them, you see? It's been said here so many times before, and this article simply reinforces it, that men are here, according to women in society, to produce for women in society. And those words are particularly important for you to internalize here. Remember exactly what they said. I want you to memorize this phrase. Quote, in short, having a man whose primary function is not as alpha male breadwinner, but domestic drudge, just ain't sexy. Isn't it a beautiful thing to know how you're viewed by the world around you? You see, I'm not trying to end misandry. Ending misandry is impossible. It's like trying to persuade society to treat cars and airplanes as human beings. Airplanes exist to serve, and men do as well. At least that's what the expectation is according to society. And knowing that, what I find seriously disturbing and demotivating, and also kind of humorous, is the amount of men that are simply happy being viewed that way. I mean, common sense would tell you that if someone looks at you as something to be used and discarded after use, you should look at them with as much disdain and insignificance as they view you with. But instead, I've often heard men attempt to insult me for implying that if you do choose to be with a woman, importance, the most importance, should be placed on whether or not she's with you for you, instead of what bills of hers you can pay. Let that sink in for a moment. There are men in the manosphere that attempt to insult me for stating that a man should insist on verifying whether a woman is genuinely interested in them, as opposed to whether or not he can provide resources for her. And then these same men go and complain about losing money in divorce. It's incredible. It's incredible how enslaved some of these men are. Voluntarily enslaved, but enslaved nonetheless. But again, my friends, the words say it all. Not being an alpha male breadwinner just ain't sexy. And sexy to whom? To women, of course, who have no problems telling men directly that your sexiness is tied up in your ability to take care of her. How convenient. The article continues on saying, quote, divorce lawyer Vanessa Lloyd Pratt says that in her experience, the decision to allow the wife to be the main wage earner will have a detrimental effect on as many as half of these relationships, and that divorce statistics in these cases have risen by at least 5% in the past 2 years. She says, my warning would be to think long and hard about letting the man stay at home, she says. I know it's very trendy for the wife to be the breadwinner, but in my professional experience, this decision will strain the marriage. It may be fun at first to say, I have a house husband, but the wife will quickly begin to resent the fact that the man is not pulling his weight financially. And the question to be asked, of course, then, is whether or not should a working husband begin to resent his stay-at-home wife for not pulling her weight financially. Here's a bit of useful advice that men seem incapable of applying to women. Put zero stock in what women say, and react accordingly to what they do. I think the men's movement would be much better off if we started doing that the next time some woman pokes her nose into the manosphere telling us how to talk about women, while never actually telling women how to talk about men. Before we go back to this article, let's do a little thought experiment. Tomorrow, the blatant lie that feminists have been parading for the benefit of those they serve, that is women, tomorrow, the lie of 1 in 4 women will become victims of rape becomes a reality. And again, for the purposes of a disclaimer, this is a thought experiment only. Let's say, I don't know, something gets put in the water which causes men to rape women at the actual rate feminists falsely accuse them of. What you would see are women arguing for some kind of Orwellian police state in which men could be randomly put in concentration camps just for the crime of seeming a bit too rapey. Yes, it would be that bad. You'd have the National Guard patrolling American streets. It would get that bad. And in this hypothetical scenario, imagine men going up to women and saying, whoa, you're painting men with an awfully broad brush there. Rape is an act, men are a gender, blah, blah, blah. Would women be trying to hear that shit? Hell no, they wouldn't. The same women who demand that men in the manosphere not paint women with a broad brush in this scenario, would likely be right there with their sisters demanding that men accused of rape, even just accused of it, be indefinitely detained, no judge, no jury, or even worse. And we're supposed to watch millions of women divorcing men, taking money they didn't earn, depriving fathers of their children, and we're supposed to not generalize even when half of marriages lead to divorce? Really? Let's put it in perspective. Half of marriages end in divorce. Upwards of 90% of child custody is awarded to women. God even knows what percentage of women receive alimony and child support in comparison to men. But how many relationships or one-night stands or friends with benefits situations actually end in rape? Not to mention on top of this, that men generalizing women is harmless to women, other than the fact that women will no longer be able to steal our resources. Women generalizing men is extremely harmful to men, to the point where we can be unjustly jailed based on the whims or words of a woman. So again, men, pay attention to what women do and ignore what they say. And so going back to homemaking, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because women say that homemaking is important and vital and so on. But when we ask the lawyers fielding these house husband divorce situations, we see that in practice, women tend to resent their husbands for doing the same exact work they do. Which means, of course, that these women are lazy, they don't want to carry themselves, and they'd rather pay desperate men who are willing to slave away a huge portion of their lives at work with sex and household chores. To put this in perspective, let's calculate just how much actual time is devoted to providing for these women and their children. Let's take the standard work week of 40 hours, even though these men habitually work 50 or 60 or 70 hours a week, but let's just take 40. If the average work week of a man supporting his family is 40 hours a week, and we have the average age of retirement in America at 61 years, and we also have the average age of a first-time father at around 25, give or take a year or two for different demographics, then we have 61 minus 25 gives us 36 years of a man's life dedicated towards supporting children and a stay-at-home wife. There are 1,878.4 weeks in 36 years. 40 hours of work per year gives us 75,136 hours at work over the course of 36 years. Now, your average MGTOW, who only supports himself, obviously doesn't have to support women and children, and could reasonably shave off half or even more of that time spent at work, but we'll take half. And that gives him an extra 37,568 hours of free time during his lifetime. It's pretty staggering when it's all put in perspective, isn't it? 37.5 thousand hours of free time. It was Esther Vilar who said it best, I think, in her work, The Manipulated Man, when she said, quote, "Why else will a doctor who as a child liked to observe tadpoles in jam jars spend his life opening up nauseating growths, examining and pronouncing on human excretions? Why else does he busy himself night and day with people of such repulsiveness that everyone else is driven away? Does a pianist who as a child liked to tinkle on the piano really enjoy playing the same Chopin nocturne over and over again all his life? Why else does a politician who as a schoolboy discovered the techniques of manipulating people successfully continue as an adult, mouthing words and phrases as a minor government functionary? I mean, does he actually enjoy contorting his face and playing the fool and listening to the idiotic chatter of other politicians? Surely he must have once dreamed of a different kind of life. Even if he became president of the United States, wouldn't the price be too high? One can hardly assume men do all these things for pleasure and without feeling a desire for change. They do it because they have been manipulated into doing it. Their whole life is nothing but a series of conditioned reflexes, a series of animal acts. A man who is no longer able to perform these acts, whose earning capacity is lessened, is considered a failure. He stands to lose everything. His wife, his family, his home, his whole purpose in life. All the things, in fact, which give him security. Of course, one might say that a man who has lost his capacity for earning money is automatically freed from his burden and should be glad about this happy ending. But freedom is the last thing he wants. He functions, as we shall see, according to the principle of pleasure and non-freedom. To be sentenced to lifelong freedom is a worse fate than lifelong slavery." End quote. But you see, Esther Vilar, men going their own way are the first modern men to actually want this freedom you speak of. We want our 37,000 plus hours of freedom back, and we want to take as many like-minded men with us as possible. And the first thing we plan to do with this freedom is to take a long, refreshing piss on the Man Up articles, the Where Have All the Good Men Gone parakeeting, and after we're done with this, we wish nothing more than to release male entropy. Male entropy, the likes of which the modern world has never witnessed. That's what male freedom is, after all. Entropy. It's men striking off into a million different directions, unapologetically pursuing any and all curiosities of nature in the universe that call to us. Go write a book. Fuck a prostitute. Invent something. Discover a new branch of mathematics. Howl at the fucking moon for all I care. Eat like a king. Fuck as many women as you want. And if you wish, with absolutely no obligation to them. Study prostate cancer. Start breakaway communities for the benefit of men and boys. Learn to grow your own food. Pick up a copy of Leninger's Biochemistry and just read it. For fun. You have 35,000 extra hours to fill, you lucky bastard. Read. Learn. Do whatever it is you wish. Do whatever it is makes you happy. Now, many claim that this type of male entropy would collapse civilization. It very well might. Or it could change what drives civilization from the engine of gynocentrism to an engine of human discovery. Maybe, in such a civilization, men and boys would instead be ashamed of not having invented something, instead of not having had sex yet, or reproduced yet, or gotten married yet, etc., etc. Food for thought. But anyway, the article continues, and in this article, Richard again says, quote, "Our elder son was just a baby, and I was intrigued by the thought of spending all day and every day with him. It didn't offend my masculinity at all, and we'd also just moved into a bigger house, and there was a lot of renovation work to be done. So when the baby was asleep, I would don my hard hat and do some building work." He says, "I know my grandfather and my father could never have been house husbands, but I didn't see why there should be a social stigma in this day and age." But Richard says the balance in their relationship quickly shifted. He says, "I was happy to do all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, and washing, but I began to feel that Louise was taking me for granted." He says, "She'd come home exhausted after a 10-hour day, and I'd be desperate to chat and to have some adult conversation, but she'd say she was too tired." Now that's actually understandable if you ask me. But he continues on and says, he poured his heart and soul into being a good, quote, mother, more so after their second son was born 2 years later. He says, "I made sure I structured my days with the children. I took them swimming. We went to the park and did lots of activities with them, like reading and crafts. I lived and breathed those children, but not once did I regret the decision to put my career on hold." Yes, it's hard not making your own money, Richard says, but I was doing the essential job of bringing up our children. But then the hammer blow fell and Louise walked out, taking the boys with her. Richard says, "I begged her not to go, but I think she had simply decided she could find someone more dynamic than me. Read hypergamy in action, gentlemen." He says sadly. "Suddenly," he says, "the children I'd cared for since they were babies were being taken away. It's all very well to be a house husband, but she had come to look down on me, to think of me as not very masculine and not hard-working. It was as if all the things I did around the house didn't count. That was nothing compared to how hard she had to work in her mind, which was so unfair. And the great irony was that we decided together that I should stay at home with the children." End quote. An important point to note here is that this scenario is exactly the same as it usually is with women. The man raises the children, he nurtures them, which proves the women are natural caregivers of children myth wrong, and then the divorce comes, and instead of giving the children to the man who spent all his time raising them, as is usually done when it's a woman, the female breadwinner is accorded custody. Interesting, isn't it? And so further down in the article, another one of these house dads reported the following. He says, quote, "There weren't many couples doing this when we first made the decision, and I think some other mothers thought I was trying to seduce them when I chat them at coffee mornings and play groups," he says. "In the park, they'd all be sitting chatting to each other while I rushed around physically playing with my kids and they ignored me. I find that quite telling. You see, we can give women their women-only gyms. We can turn society inside out to give them STEM scholarships so that they can have traditionally male jobs if they want them. But a man raising his children amongst a group of predominantly female parents is treated with suspicion and is ignored and ostracized. Maybe men in these situations should start their own groups." To which, of course, these same women would respond by implying that these men were a group of pedophiles or some other nonsense. The moral of this story, men, is that you should never, ever, ever depend financially on a woman by being one of these stay-at-home dads. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't care about your lifestyle. I think your desire to raise your children is admirable, and without a doubt, most men would certainly like the luxury of spending more time with their kids instead of working 70 hours a week. This is indisputable, really. I discourage you from being a stay-at-home dad because of the inherent risk that comes along with being financially dependent on a woman. Never, never, never be financially dependent on a woman. Now, the reasons are quite clear for me saying this, but just in case you don't get it, I'll repeat them once again. First, there are biological realities at play here that make it a very real and likely possibility that this woman supporting you will breed resentment and look at you as less of a man and a human being because you're not bringing home the bacon. And if you read the article entirely, you'll see that these female breadwinners actually encouraged and suggested that their husbands stay at home and watch the kids, and they still developed a resentment to them because of it and eventually ended up divorcing them. Which brings me to the next crucial point here. Women have the luxury of being perceived as society's perpetual victims. Thanks to both male and female biological predilections, women have cultivated an entire political grievance industry based on the inherent understanding that they are and forever will be humanity's default victims. Meaning that if a woman does the majority of child rearing, society will award her custody. But if the man does the majority of it, he still loses his kids. He still has to pay child support. You see, and that is what we can honestly call female privilege. And, oh my God, he used the word female privilege, and that's just like the male privilege, and he's just like the feminist. Oh my God. Let me talk about that for a second, because it needs to be addressed before I move on. You see, this is how we let language control us. When women and feminists say that women are oppressed, this does not mean that they are actually oppressed. It means that they claim to be oppressed. The burden of proof is on them to prove this. And an examination of the evidence proves, in my assessment, that neither women or feminists are in fact oppressed by any measurable standard. More importantly, women and feminists saying they are oppressed does not necessarily mean that men saying they are oppressed are mimicking the female tactic of deriving power from a self-cultivated victim status. A class of people can in fact be systematically oppressed or victimized, and I don't care what Marx wrote about it, or whether or not the feminists are using the same language for their own political agenda. The fact, for example, that blacks at one point in history were targeted for slavery means that at this point in history, they were a group of people identified, in this case by their race, that were selectively targeted for enslavement, meaning they were in fact oppressed. So yes, men can be oppressed as a class. They can be victims. They can be victimized. And using the word victim or oppressed is not code word for being, quote, just like the feminists. I hope we're getting that, because I'm done allowing feminists or right-wing conspiracy weirdos to control the language I use. So again, the burden of proof for those that claim oppression is on them, and I'll gladly give you an example of just how men are actually victimized and oppressed. The following link in the description box talks about a man being jailed numerous times for failing to pay his wife's $78,000 a year alimony payment. That is a form of oppression. The man did not commit any crime. His only offense was the admittedly stupid act of getting married. And this is an example of a man being oppressed by the current supposedly just legal system in place merely for being a man who was married at one point in time. He is forced to pay money he earns to a woman he no longer has anything to do with, and that is a form of slavery. A form of slavery that is rewarded with another form of slavery, a trip to jail, if he fails to be a productive slave to his ex-wife slave master. That, my friends, is why men can say they are victimized. That is why men can say they are oppressed.